Coming up on this edition of Tom Jordan's Got Issues, national talk show host and author Brian Kilmeade joins me. We're going to talk about something that happened a long time ago. You might remember, and yet it relates to what we're going through today. It involves defeat, oppression, courage, wisdom, sacrifice, and risk. That's in this edition of Tom Jordan's Got Issues.
You thought you had issues?
You've been shot at in a train wreck.
I love my country.
Wait until you hear this.
I required that as a requirement.
1600 Pennsylvania Avenue.
Yeah.
She calls you a liar.
This is, I gotta shake it up. I can't lie about facts.
Tom Jordan?
Great to be with you, Tom.
You don't strike me as someone who's clutching your pearls.
Major issues there.
I don't have pearls.
Tom Jordan's Got Issues.
You said it, my friend. I've got a lot of issues. I mean, it is 2020 after all, but so does this guy.
He drank too much. He got himself in trouble. He beat up another lawmaker, got himself censured. He was lazy. The family thought he was never going to amount to anything.
Yeah, he's got issues too, and I'll tell you who he was and why Brian Kilmeade, my guest you just heard there, says that man turned into an American hero who found his calling to lead people sometimes, and sometimes not, successfully, against disunity, against bigotry, and he changed the direction, Brian Kilmeade says, of this entire country. So that leads me to my issue today, what has to do with unprecedented times. Do we really live in an era that is unlike previous generations and centuries? It feels like it. And if we do live in unprecedented times, is there anything from history that we can learn from that can provide hope and courage? Racism is rearing its ugly head after another sickening death, a murder of a black man who, by all accounts, was a fine human being. Outrage understandably extends now across the globe. Riots and protests like I've never seen. I mean, we can't compare this to Detroit in 1967. That was very bad. Los Angeles in 1992, I remember that well. It was horrible, those times. But still, those were, for the most part, local events by local residents. These protests, these riots, this outrage and response all across the nation and the world, they're happening, it seems, everywhere. And many people coming into cities to protest and to agitate. I want to address that on an upcoming episode, by the way, more fully. But back to this, unprecedented times. Well, just look at this past year. We've seen a life-altering global pandemic, people near and far dying from a new disease, with people blaming each other for the virus, and the subsequent lockdowns that spurred a host of protests and calamity in people's lives, and that is not an understatement. That felt unprecedented, and it still does. And then a Minneapolis police officer kills an unarmed black man. Other deaths ensue after that, and as a result of it, I mean, we had a man killed locally in Detroit during a protest, and many elsewhere as well. It's chaos, different. But is it entirely different? Is it unprecedented? Can we think of times past that can act as a precedent to help give us clarity? Remember the Alamo? Do you remember how that played with and into the Civil War, that war which centered around slavery? Why was it important for the future of our country to save Texas? Why was that? And was it really? We're going to get into that a little bit today. My guest today is Brian Kilmeade, not the way we normally hear him or you might see him. He's the co-host of the country's #1 morning newscast, Fox and Friends. He is the host of the nationally syndicated radio program, The Brian Kilmeade Show, and the author of 6 books. His latest, I got a copy of it, just came out in paperback, Sam Houston and the Alamo Avengers, the Texas Victory That Changed American History. It seems odd to say this, but this helps give perspective in a unique way about what we are struggling with right now as a nation, what we can do about our struggle, why a leader sometimes needs to retreat in order to eventually find victory, and how coordination between government and private leaders can be fruitful and most effective. and why even a person who seems to be highly ineffective at first can become a national hero. It's an inspiring story. If this historical count says anything, it's that there's a lot of hope for us right now in the United States of America. All right, let's go to Brian Kilmeade right now.
Brian Kilmeade, he's the co-host on the #1 morning news program, Fox and Friends, on the Fox News Channel. He is the host of the nationally syndicated radio program, The Brian Kilmeade Show, and the author of 6 books. His latest is now in paperback. It's Sam Houston and the Alamo Avengers, the Texas victory that changed American history. Brian, thanks for joining us on this program.
I appreciate you having me on.
I got to ask you, first off, how do you're a busy guy, and I don't understand. I'm a busy guy too, but I don't have time to write 6 books. How do you fit this all in?
Well, you start in 2003. So, I mean, it was, and then take a couple of years off in between there. I did 2 sports books. The Games Do Count. It's how you play the game, and I interviewed 72 people and then 91 people about what they did in sports and helped them out later in life. And then the second book was how really, even if you're a pro, it doesn't matter really what you accomplish. Those things you experience during the quest to be great really defines who you are. And then I just had this other thing that I've always been fascinated by history, and that George Washington spy book, and I've been looking at it for 20 years. It kept thinking that somehow someone's going to tell me this is all a lie. And the more I looked into it, the more real it was. And I got convinced by Bill O'Reilly, of all people. He's like, you should do this. I've never seen this done at a high level. And it went well. And then after that, I just found a different project every 2 years.
Well, your latest project is dealing with the Alamo, but not even specifically with that initial defeat, but what happened afterwards. Sam Houston and the Alamo Avengers, how the Texas victory changed American history. Sitting here in Detroit, Michigan, not a lot of people are thinking, thank goodness we won that battle in Texas, because that really procured and solidified our history as America. How did that victory change our history in this country?
So they gave me this series called What Made America Great. And I'm able to go around. I did 21 features. Would have been a lot more had this pandemic not hit, but we had 5 more ready to go. Shoots ready to go anyway, but now everything's on hold for now. One of them was one of the first ones I did was the Alamo. I'm thinking to myself, how do I do the Alamo different? Everyone talks about the Alamo. And as soon as I got there, people were telling me, everyone always stops here. I would love to see someone do this whole story. And I go, what are you talking about? Well, what happened afterwards? Within a couple of months, we reversed the whole thing. And Texas got our freedom. We're our own nation for 9 years, and then the conversion over to become part of America. So I go, whoa, wait a second. So I just took about 3 or 4 months and started looking into this and see how prevalent it was outside Texas. And then this bigger-than-life character, Sam Houston, literally, he was bigger than life. He was about 6'4", blue-eyed guy, extremely charismatic, big flaws, big assets. And when I was doing Andrew Jackson Miracle of New Orleans, he's all over that story because Andrew Jackson mentored him. And I said, even though he's not a president, I bet you I could get people interested outside Texas because, we don't have the whole Southwest without Texas. And then I found out, the controversy really doesn't exist. Not only did we have Texas, we had in Louisiana Purchase, Andrew Jackson, Thomas Jefferson, and James Madison said, we have this in this deal, and we just never pursued it because we already doubled the size of the country. They weren't going to fixate on Texas. And Andrew Jackson always thought, he's like, how the hell could we give up the whole south of our country? So it was always in the back of his mind. Sam Houston talking on his porch with James K. Polk, Buchanan, and Martin Van Buren talked about this. We're going to get this. And when they couldn't populate it, and Americans went down there to do it and cut a deal to bring down families and farmers and ranchers, they began to make it thrive under Spanish and then Mexican rule. And then when Spain changed the rules and said, you're not going to elect anybody, you're not going to have any control over your taxes, you're not going to have any due process, that's when the friction started. Stephen F. Austin tried to heal it. He ended up in jail. He came back and said, the only thing we're going to have to do is fight our way out of this. And that's where I really pick up the story.
You know, when we think of the Alamo and this story, we often think of guys like Davy Crockett. We think of Jim Bowie. But Sam Houston is a guy that you're bringing out to the forefront, and it's a fascinating tale of courage and sticking to your convictions and having hope that there will be victory in something you truly believe in. This guy, Sam Houston, you touched on him a bit, but what made this guy so great and so victorious?
Well, I mean, listen, I think people can relate to him because he wasn't perfect. He drank too much. He got himself in trouble. He beat up another lawmaker, got himself censured. As a kid growing up, he was lazy. The family thought he was never going to amount to anything. Then when he finally decides the pressure's too much, he goes and lives with the American Indians, the Cherokees, where he spends the rest of his life fighting for their rights, which he was the first American Indian advocate of high profile in our country, I would argue. And he always was going to bat for them because he really understood the culture. And at the same time, they called him at first the Raven, and then they called him the Big Drunk because he'd have a few drinks and do what everybody else does in a drink, do some stupid stuff. But along the way, he kept learning about life, and he kept growing, and his natural military and personal leadership style really began to separate him from the rest. He was governor of Tennessee, he became the first president of Texas, first governor of Texas. But at 40-something years old, he decides to head to Texas because he sees this conflict fomenting, and he thinks he's uniquely qualified to lead. After all, he fought in the Battle of Horseshoe Bend. He fought in the War of 1812. He was a military officer, studied under Jackson. They used to talk about war and war doing things out all the time. So when he goes down there, it's a bunch of very headstrong Texans who thought, I'm going to fight, and I know what's right. And they didn't listen to him, and he said, don't go for the Alamo. They did. They say, don't hold the Alamo. They stayed. And in the end, they fought valiantly and with in a way in which we have every right to hold them on a pedestal. 180 guys holding off as many as 3,000 for 13 days. But they all died, horrific deaths. And the way they fought outlined who they were. But what happened after is Sam Houston, Mr. Aggressor, I'll take on any man, had to decide to do something that was against everything that he was told when he was growing up. You confront your enemy. He had to run because his guys weren't ready. They were outmanned. They were untrained. And I talk about the runaway scrape and how he had to shape the battlefield for one titanic square off battle. Win or lose, it'd only be one battle. And then with Sam Houston, the Alamo Avengers, I talk about how he avenged the loss of 400 guys at Goliad and at least 180 at the Alamo in sensational fashion. But America wasn't ready to absorb Texas when they got their freedom because of the slave state free state balance, and they had some slaves in Texas. It didn't make up the backbone of the culture, but they were there. So America was on tender hooks back then, and we resulted in a civil war, obviously. So I bring you through that, and in the paperback I added how Abraham Lincoln and Sam Houston almost combined forces to keep Texas out of the Civil War, but ultimately Houston said, you know what, I'm just too young. If I was a younger man, I'd do it, but I just can't. I can't turn against my own state who really wanted to be in the Confederacy. So he backed out. I just try to give you that slice of history.
We're speaking with Brian Kilmeade, and I want to ask you this, because I think every generation we get into this mindset that we've got it worse than previous generations. We use words like unprecedented. We hear that a lot lately, or phrases like in these uncertain times. But, you've touched on this, and this country has seen many unprecedented and uncertain times, even perilous times in our history. What do you think is today's titanic battle that we need to wage?
I just think we got to go all out to heal the political divides in our country. And I think the next man or woman after this election, 2020, the horse is out of the barn. But afterwards, I would hope both parties get together and say, listen, we're not fighting over something like free people and enslaved people. This is red and blue, and you have a green agenda. Well, that's fine. I have oil and gas, and I have a natural gas which burns clean. Let's not make this a religion. Let's meet halfway. Let's meet halfway on the border. I think that's what's going to take. It's going to take very mature leaders in our country to come together and run on a more practical platform rather than just a platform of division. It really started, in my humble opinion, and your listeners might disagree with me, in the late 90s when they took on Clinton on the impeachment where he was wrong, but I think Republicans went over the top. And then the controversial election, which is nobody's fault, but it created bitterness. And then after the Iraq War, they feel that Bush lied. I don't think he did. Everyone thought that was the right move, and that's why he got 70 votes in the Senate. And then the scenario where Trump comes out of nowhere and pulls off the biggest upset in history, and they never admit to it. They say he cheated, which he didn't. So, listen, that's the scenario. Republicans are wrong, Democrats are wrong. Republicans are wrong, Democrats are wrong. Can we agree this is a political philosophy? And it is not something that should be dividing us the way it is. I would just hope there's somebody out there listening, there's a politician out there campaigning, or has in the back of their mind that the country matters more than the party.
I want to talk about this because I spoke the other day to Gene Sperling. He worked in both the Clinton and the Obama administrations as the director of economic counsel, and he really recently spoke to me on issues of guaranteed incomes, economic parity between differing, quote unquote classes. And you speak now about compromise, but this seems to be rearing its head, this idea of the government taking more and more care of its people, and some people classify it as socialism. Is this an area that you think we should compromise on, or is this a battle that we should wage and stick to what some believe would be the Founding Fathers' vision for this country?
Look, you can compromise in this area, but I think fundamentally we got to go back to a scenario where we want to make our own future. We want to be in control of our future. We want to have the right to fail. We want to have the right to experience our dreams, no matter how big or small, whether you're your own landscaping company or you want to be CEO of Goldman Sachs. And I don't think the fundamental mindset of Americans is make my success, and if not, I'm going to blame you. I think we got to go back to early schools and families and just talk about competing. And if there's some things we could do to equal the playing field, I'm for it. I don't think it's right. I definitely think there's some inherent challenges that come with people's ethnic backgrounds that we could go out of our way to level the playing field. But we've already done so much in that area. Talk about the progress and talk about how to put it further. But I actually don't think any community or an ethnicity says, I want a handout because things aren't equal. I would think that we just want to level the playing field rather than pay off particular people. And, when the economy collapsed because of a pandemic, unlike 2008, over irresponsibility, government rules, and people and bad actors, this is nobody's fault. So whatever we could do to responsibly get out of it, I'm for, without destroying our economy and writing checks that we never be able to cash or pay for. So I would hope that there's a responsible way out of this, but I do want that American mindset that brought us to Texas that said, all I need is a gun, a rake, and a wagon and my family, and I'll find a way to make that work. I know, thankfully, we settled our country, but that mindset that had that Texas salon owner stand up and say, my workers are going broke, I'm going broke, I have clients, they are dying to have their hair cut and their nails done, I want to go back to work and I'm going to do it. That is the Texas mindset. And I want to get in a different level, in a 2020 level, I want to get back to that for our country. Not rebellion, but the fight for rights. The right to be successful or fail is fundamentally in America. And I want to get back to that mindset at the same time knowing that there are certain things happening in our country that certain people wake up and they have 2 strikes on them already. And I'd love to get some of those strikes off and put them at the plate with a 0-0 count.
Brian Kilmeade, the author of the latest book is Sam Houston and the Alamo Adventures, the Texas Victory That Changed American History. It's now out in paperback. It's a courageous and a very inspiring story. Brian, thanks for writing the book, and thanks for your time this morning.
No problem. If anybody wants it signed for Father's Day, my bookstore is not allowed to open, but they open up the back door for me. If you just go to briankilmeade.com, it'll go to them. I can personalize and we can mail out.
Wonderful. briankilmeade.com. Thanks, Brian. Enjoy your day. I know you got a busy one ahead.
Go get him, Tom. You too.
Hey, thanks to my guest, Brian Kilmeade, on the Tom Jordan's God Issues podcast. I would love your thoughts. You can find me on Twitter at Tom Jordan News. or go to the WWJ Facebook page. You can go there as well. You can find me on Facebook also. And don't forget to listen to WWJ News Radio 950 every weekday morning with Roberto Jacina and me, the entire morning crew, as well, also on radio.com from 5 a.m. to 10 a.m. Eastern. Again, that's WWJ News Radio 950. Also find us live stream on radio.com. I'm Tom Jordan, and I've got issues.